Howdy YouTube, Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. Today we're going to do something that I've been looking forward to and dreading a bit because I just don't know how it's going to, or how it was going to work out. And I'm going to show you what it is that I did, the products I purchased, the configuration, everything soup to nuts, and then the results I got, which could be a little less than pleasing to say the least, but I knew this going into it. Now you're probably wondering, what the hell is he talking about? And I am talking about 10 gigabit networking. What my plan was to do with all these Dell server updates was to put controllers, hard drive controllers, SAS controllers, serial ATA controllers in these Dells that would give me the ability to go beyond a 2 terabyte hard drive, would give me the ability to use very fast SSD drives in the unit, and would give me the capability of doing all that in these Dells. So I guess it was only two things it was going to allow me to do. But anyway, the point was to put the controllers in there so I could get higher speed hard drives. And then the other thing I wanted to do was put 10 gig network adapters in the two Dells, and then just do a basic peer-to-peer LAN between them so that I would have a very fast network in which to transfer my virtual machines on, because I'm constantly moving virtual machines around, hard drives and that kind of thing. So I wanted the fastest possible speeds I could get. That's all fine and dandy. However, you have to remember that your transfer speeds are going to be limited by your hard drive read-write speeds. Now, in these Dells, in both of these Dell 710 servers, R710s, I have a pair of 130 gig mirrored SAS drives. They're 15K SAS drives, 130 gig, and they're in a RAID 1 array under the H700 controller. That's on both servers, and that's my boot drive. And then what I've done on one of the Dell servers is it has two 500 gig Samsung serial ATA 2 drives in there, so they're capped at 300 megabits per second, or sorry, 3 gigabits per second. And in the other server, the other Dell, the production server, I have two 931 or 1 terabyte hard drives, also in a RAID 1 mirror with the H700 controller. I don't know if I mentioned on the other Dell, but it's on the same controller in a RAID 1 array. So I don't have Drive Bender running. I'm not using Microsoft Drive spaces. None of that crap is getting in the way. This is purely letting the controller set them up as a RAID 1 array. So I guess the next thing I want to do is show you the test results I got on both of those drive arrays, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at for speed of the hard drives. So on the screen before us, this is one of the two SAS drives I have in there. Now SAS is different from serial ATA. SAS is serial attached SCSI, so it's going to be it's a faster spinning drive, and it has faster throughput than a serial ATA 2 drive would, and that's what those Hitachis are. So let me switch to the Hitachis right here, and you can see that these are, oh no, I went too far. There we go. They're on the PERT controller. They're in a RAID 1 array. Got our firmware version, hard disk serial number, and you can see they are serial ATA revision 2 drives. So they're serial ATA 2 drives. So if I bring up some test results here, these are test results from Crystal Diskmark. This is on my C drive, which is of course the SAS drive. So you can see my read and write rates. And you'll notice down below that my serial ATA drive actually got much better test results than on reads and writes, sequential reads and writes, than my SAS drive. But my SAS drive did a little bit better on 4K tests, as you can see it there. But these disks are pretty much maxed out at about 120. Let's just average them together and say 120 megabytes per second. And because I only have them in one array, they're not going to be any faster than having like multiple spindles like I would in a RAID 10 or a RAID 60 or a RAID whatever array, or even a RAID 5 with a lot of spinning hard drive platters. I'd get better, a little bit better results, but not by much. But remember, my plan is to put really fast 500 megabit per second, 600 megabit per second SSD drives in here. So I'm planning for the future. So what does this mean for my gigabit tests? Well, it means my gigabit test is going to be skewed because I have very slow hard drives. So the way we're going to get around that is we're going to create what's called a Ramdisk, because I have plenty of RAM on this machine. So what I can do is set up an 8 or a 10 gig RAM disk, and then we will set up the 10 gig network and then copy to and from the RAM disk to get to actual good idea of what throughput speeds are. The problem is that when you create an 8 or a 10 gig RAM disk copying with 10 gigabit networking, the test results can fly by pretty quick. So if you blink, you might miss it. So the next thing I want to show you is how I got those Mellanox adapters set up on these Dells. Now let me qualify this before I go any further. This is a Dell R710 server. This is my production server. It's running Windows Server 2016 with all the updates done. Now, as far as drivers go on the Mellanox cards, first of all, let me show you what cards I bought. So these are the cards that I bought off of eBay. They're an MNPA19-XTR 10 giga, not gigabyte, but gigabit Mellanox ConnectX-2 PCI 8X 10 gig SFP plus network cards with cable. I bought 2 of those, one for each server. So that's what's installed in these Dells. So let's go to let's actually go to Device Manager, and I want to show you the what drivers I'm using for these cards. So if we go into Device Manager and we go to the Mellanox ConnectX-2 Ethernet adapter, I have not done the firmware upgrades on these Mellanox cards. I have not done driver upgrades. I am using the driver that comes with Windows Server 2016. It is a Mellanox driver, dated from 4/10 of 2016, and the version number is 5.1.11.548.0, and that's on both of these machines. Now the next thing I want to show you is what you need to do to configure these cards to work properly together. There's some settings you're going to need to change. So if I right click on this adapter and go to Properties and go to Advanced, the first thing I want to go to is I'm going to skip all these up here. I'm going to go to Interrupt Moderation, and these settings are from an article I ran across of somebody else who was using these cards. Now their settings were for Windows Server 2012 R2, but they'll work here as well. The first thing you want to do is make sure you've got Interrupt Moderation disabled. Any of your offloads, you want to make sure they're Receive and Transmit enabled. You want to set your jumbo packets to 9,000. Let me see here. Yeah, the offload, the rest are set at default with the exception of let's see, receive buffers are at maximum 4096. The send buffers are at 4096. You need to increase that. And then there was one other setting. Yeah, you want to make sure your processes, like your RSS, are equal to the number of CPUs you have, or CPU cores you have. I have 8 cores, so this is set to 8. Same way with the, let's see, where's the other process? Same way with queues. RSS processes and RSS queues should both be set to 8. Now, I'm in a unique situation where I also am running this under HyperV. So let me show you what I did under HyperV Manager, because it's very important, this step you do. So we'll bring up HyperV Manager, and you want to right click and you want to go down to your virtual switch manager. Now I just created another virtual switch. It's an external network. It's on the Mellanox Ethernet adapter. I called it Virtual Machine VMM for Virtual Machine Move, and I labeled it as a 10 gig SFT plus. It's SFP plus. Sorry about that, but you get the idea. And I had to create that within HyperV. And I also allow the management operating system to share that network adapter. Now the next thing I did was under HyperV, I went to settings again, and under live migrations, I have told it specifically to use these IP addresses for live migration. And that is all the IP addresses within the 1.0 subnet. So you see it's 192.168.1.0/24. So any other machine that is connected on that one subnet will be able to do live migration with this machine. So that's very important too. And then under the network card itself, you have to go out under and edit the HyperV network adapter, and I labeled it VMM so I knew what it meant. So you have to right click here, go to properties, and then go to your TCP IPv4 and set this IP address on my management LAN, or on my main LAN, is 192.168.5.6. So what I made this one is 1.6. And you notice I only put an IP address and I only put a subnet mask, and you don't put a gateway in, don't put DNS or anything else. It's not needed. And then you need to mirror these settings on your secondary machine, or this is not going to work correctly for you. So before I show you the demo, what I want to do is talk briefly about what kind of speeds you can expect. And if you have slow spinning hard drives like I do, especially if they're serial ATA2 and not 3, your results are going to be abysmal. They're probably not going to be better than 1 gigabit per second networking adapters, because you're limited by the hard drives, how fast they can read and write data. But once I get SSDs into this thing, it'll be quite a bit faster. So I'm going to show you a file copy across the 10 gig network by moving a virtual machine, and we'll start moving a virtual machine and then we'll let it finish. But I want to show you the kind of speeds you can expect on that LAN connection on the 10 gig, even though I made all those changes just moving a HyperV virtual machine. Alright, so let's just move our web machine just for shits and giggles. I actually don't think it's a very large machine, but we'll just right click on it and tell it move. Next, I'm going to move the virtual machine, and I'm going to move it over to MCS-Lab1, and I'm going to check the name. Okay. Now, in some of the articles they said, oh, you need to make sure you enter the IP address. No, I don't. I have 2 subnets, and I'm going to show you. It's using 5.1 for DNS translation, but keep in mind I've told HyperV only to use the one subnet to do machine moves. So regardless of the fact that I'm able to use the machine name instead of the IP address, it's still going to work. I'm going to move the virtual machine's data to a single location, and that is a folder on, this is now MCS Lab 1. So I'm going to move that to the D drive virtual machine folder. Select that folder, click next. I'm going to accept the defaults there, and I'm going to go ahead and click on finish. Now you're probably saying to yourself, oh, that's going over the 1 gigabit connection. No, it isn't. As you can see right here, it is going out over the VMM connection at 1.6, and you can see the kind of throughput I'm getting. So keep in mind, even though I've got those 2 10 gig network cards put together, that the speed is going to be limited by the write speed and the read speed and the write speed on my hard drive on the receiving end. So even though you're seeing 5, 8, 700 megabits per second, that is not even 1 gigabit per second. So, and that's on the 10 gig cards. Now what we'll do is, after this move is finished, we'll come back and we'll see our final results on that. You'll see that the machine is moved, and then we'll try it again using a little different tactic. So the move is still going on, and now I've switched over to MCS Lab 1. You can see up there at the top, and you can still see we got pretty good throughput, even though it's less than a gigabit per second. It's still moving the machine fairly quickly, and it is on the VMM adapter. So this one is 1.5, the other one was 1.6. 6 on the production server. Alright, so we're back on the production machine now, and you can see the move is complete. The machine is gone off of here, and if I switch over to the lab machine and bring up HyperV, you'll see that Web 1 is now over here. And voila, it is. And if I right click on this one here and go down to HyperV settings, you'll see same thing here on the live migrations. I've told it to use the 1.0 network. Only these for live migrations, which is what it is doing. You know, even though that migration wasn't live, that's what Windows calls it. So I'm going to drop it there. Now let's go back over here to my production HyperV machine. And I'm going to close HyperV, and then I'm going to load a program called, where are you here? There we go, Soft Perfect Ramdisk. Alright, so I'm going to bring this up. Now, what I'm going to do is, I've got plenty of free RAM on this. I've got, what, 15 gig available, so I'm going to change this. All you have to do is come here and go to Properties, and I'm going to create a 10096, a 10 gig hard drive, and we're going to call it drive letter X, and it's NTFS, and so we'll tell it OK. And then here I'm going to highlight it. Now watch what happens to my memory. I'm going to go ahead and click on Mount Selected Disk. Now this will take a minute as the RAM gets allocated. Okay, and that leaves me with about 6 gig free of RAM on my server. So now I have a 10 gig RAM disk set up. Let's switch this back over to Ethernet so we know we're on our virtual machine network here. And I'm going to switch over to the production machine, or to the lab machine. Now what I'm going to do in the lab machine is I'm going to make sure I have got drive X mapped. And let's see here. Here it is. So you'll now see I have a 10 gig disk free. Alright. So now if we come over here to the lab unit, I'm going to create another RAM disk and the same size, and it's going to be 10 gigabit, and that's going to be the Y drive. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to go over to the X drive on my production machine, that's 1.6, and I'm going to delete these two files really quickly. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to go to my RAM disk that's here. I'm going to select these two images, and I'm going to right click and choose copy, and then I'm going to come over here to the X drive. Now pay close attention over here. I'm going to go ahead and paste these. Now watch what happens. You see the speeds I'm getting? Very, 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 very fast. So I got about 5 gigabit per second, 5.6 gigabit per second at the most is what I got. So now let's come over to X and let's copy these same two. Let's do copy, and then we're going to paste them to my RAM disk here. And yes, we're going to, oh, hang on a second. I'll cancel. It's not letting me overwrite, so let me delete these two. Alright, so now if I come over to the local RAM disk, now I'm going to be copying them from my production to my lab. So I'll do right click and paste, and there we go. Now we're receiving at 5.2 gigabits per second. Now it's so fun to see that those send and receive speeds peg out again. I want to do that one more time, so I'm going to go back to my RAM disk on this machine, Control A, and then I'm going to select them all. Then I'm going to copy, and then in 3, 2, 1, I'm going to paste, and bing, bang, boom, we get 4, 3, 4, 4.1, 3.8, 3.7, 3.9, 4.2, 4.1 gigabits per second. That is half the speed of 10 gigabit, but I never expected to get 10 gigabit. Now that was copying from Y to X, so let's go out to X now and let's copy those. Control A, we'll copy them. Let's go to Y here and let's delete these two. And then let's paste. And it looks like it's a little faster coming from production than it is going to production. So paste. 11.5, 11.9, or 4.6, 4.6, 4.2, 4.7, 4.3, 4.7, etc. 4.7. So we're getting about 500 bytes per second. Sorry, not bits. We're getting 4.6 to 5 gigabit per second. And there you go. That's how I was able to get those connected and get them working together. So let's talk about 10 gigabit networking and reality for a minute. The reality is that I have old spinning hard drives. Some are serial ATA2, some are serial ATA3. And those drives are going to actually max out at 1 gigabit speed, no matter what I do, unless I put them in a 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 drive array where they have multiple spindles in a RAID array. That's one of the benefits of doing a RAID array, is you get more spindles that way. This is why I'm not in any hurry to upgrade my entire network to 10 gigabit networking. Now, let's talk for a minute about that Synology NAS I just bought. I had a choice between the 1518 Plus and the 918 Plus. Now, the 1518 Plus had one additional drive bay. It had a little bit faster processor, and it had the ability to put a 10 gigabit networking card in it. The problem, though, is that if you fill that NAS with spinning hard drives and don't choose a speedy array, you're limited to the bandwidth that the disk can provide. The network is no longer your limiting factor on bandwidth. Your hard drives are. And I would have to look this up, but I think Synology limits the speed on those units. I think it's about 275 megabytes per second total, even with 10 gig networking cards. Let's check that out. Now, these performance ratings you see here, over 225 megabytes and 221 megabytes encrypted, are sequential reading and writing. So that's the fastest I'm going to be able to go on that 918, even with a gigabit or a 10 gigabit network card in there. Now on the 1517, I could get, in theory, 1165 megabytes or 10 gigabit, pretty close to 10 gigabit, and that's sequential reading, not writing. That's something to keep in mind. Now, for my purposes, all I use a NAS storage device for is for storing my video editing files, my document files for my business, movie files for the family, movies, photos and music and stuff. And I'm never going to have a need, well, 640K RAM is all we're ever going to need, folks. You remember that quote? Yeah. For the foreseeable future, I am not going to be inundating these NAS units with 10 gigabits worth of data at a time. I am, however, going to be moving virtual machines around a lot on these Dell servers as I do new projects and test new items out. So once I get, this is where all of this work comes together on these Dell server upgrades that I've been doing. I've been upgrading the controllers in them. I put the Mellanox 10 gig networking adapters in them, and I'm going to get more physical RAM for them, probably 64 gigs of RAM on each server. And then I'm going to slam a couple of SSDs in there, a couple of 500 gig SSDs for my virtual machines. And then I should be getting about 400 to 500 megabytes per second transfer rate, or close to 4.5 to 5 gigabits transfer rate. Now that's not the 10 gig I was promised. That's in a perfect world. But you can see the method to my madness here. I'm not going to run out and buy a 10 gig switch, because the cheapest I can find that's of any value to me is that Unify switch that I just sent over to Morton in Denmark. That is the only switch I would consider, and that's in the $500 to $600 range. But I'm just not ready to do 10 gig networking yet. I don't really have any need for it, for the expenditure of money. That's why I spent the money on the H700 cards, the cables, and the 10 gig Mellanox cards for those servers. And as you can see, for the amount of money I've spent, $48 for a couple of network cards, and I think the H700 cards were under $100 a piece with cable. So we got 2 plus 2 plus 60, plus I'm going to be spending, it's probably going to be about $130 for those SSD drives. I'm waiting for the price of those to come down. But if you want to donate to that cause and get some SSDs in those R710 servers, just earmark whatever contributions you make to PayPal or Patreon and say that you want it for the SSDs for the Dell server, and then that is where that money will get allocated to. But now you can kind of see the method to my madness. The other reason I didn't spend $200 extra on that 1517 NAS over the 918 is because I'm cheap. And part of this was money that you folks donated so graciously to buy the unit. But for my business needs, I was more interested in having a legal Synology NAS, so that when I go to do some of these videos on the phenomenal programs that Synology packages with their NAS, I can do it with a clear conscience and not worry about Synology come knocking on my door and saying I'm running their software illegally. I don't want to do that. I was doing it for testing purposes, but generally I'm a good boy, and that's why we went ahead and got that Synology NAS. The other beautiful thing about buying a Synology NAS is say in a year or so that I want to upgrade to that 1518, or I want to get a rack unit in here instead of having a box. These things retain their resale value like Apple computers do. So in a year from now, I can probably get, $300 or $400 or $500, maybe even. No, I doubt it. I can probably get about $400 for that 1-year-old model 918 Plus NAS. Somebody will snatch it up for that amount of money. So they really hold their resale value as well. So even though I haven't taken the 10 gig networking plunge per se with the Synology, I do have it for my Dell R710 servers, and that was the goal of the whole thing when I got started. So there you go. Hopefully I did the steps slow enough so that you can recreate it on your end. We hope you found the video entertaining and informative, as always. And keep in mind, this is another reason I use Windows products, because with the deal I have with Microsoft, they give me X number of licenses a year, and I can play in their software all I want to. And the one thing I can do on Windows Server out of the box that I can't do with either ESXi or with what is the other one that's made by Citrix, Zen, is migrations, and that's mainly what I do. I do live migrations. Now I can do backup and restores on ESXi with Veeam, but that's a longer, more drawn out process. And I suppose there are ways to export out of ESXi and import into another copy of ESXi, but why? Why do I even want to mess with it? I like having Windows running, an operating system with a GUI running with my hypervisors. Just makes life easier for me, and I think it will for you too. So anyway, I hope you liked the video. Give us a thumbs up down below if you did. Leave your comments in the comments section. As some of you out there that are trying what I'm doing, I'll help when I can, but I'm not a Linux guy or a free BSD or whatever the hell the FreeNAS runs on. So there's a lot of great videos out there on how to set up 10 gig cards under FreeNAS and Unraid. So if those are your operating systems of choice, go Go look them up on YouTube. There's a bunch of videos out there. I know because I've watched them. And but come back and see us if you like the Windows stuff and the 10 gig networking. And now we're going to move forward with some more of our lab series, our Windows lab series. Now that we got our servers squared away and nice and clean and 10 gig network connections in them. So that ought to be fun. And don't forget, if you want to still contribute, we're taking donations for the SSD drives to go in the Dell servers. So if you want to throw $1 at us, $5, 10 cents, I don't know, PayPal will take 10 cents, probably not. But if you want to throw some money our way and you want it to go specifically for these Dell servers, just earmark it on your donation and we'll make sure that's where it goes. Anyway, thanks again for joining us. Hope you had as good a time watching as we did making it. And don't forget, we'll see you on the other side.